You're standing on a fog-wrapped London street corner in 1887, and you've just noticed something peculiar about the gas lamp flickering above you. It's not the light itself that's caught your attention. It's the small printed card tucked discreetly behind the glass, barely visible unless you know exactly where to look. The card is cream-coloured, expensive paper, with elegant script that promises private French lessons and artistic posing instruction. There's an address in Bloomsbury, nothing more. No names, no crude illustrations, just whispered suggestions wrapped in the language of respectability. But here's the thing that would amaze you if you only knew. This innocent-looking card represents not one, but two revolutionary business innovations that won't appear in respectable commerce for decades. Two ideas so clever, so ahead of their time, that their creators will be completely forgotten by history, even as their techniques reshape the entire world of business. But before we begin, take a deep breath and let your shoulders relax. If curious, cozy history helps you wind down at night, consider tapping that subscribe button. It lets me know you'd like more of these gentle, peculiar detours into the past. And if you're up for it, leave a comment with where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's oddly comforting knowing others are drifting off to the same strange stories at the same strange hour. Now then, dim the lights, nestle into something warm, and let's sink softly into a different kind of Victorian tale, one dressed in lace, lit by gaslight, and whispered behind gloved hands. You pull your coat tighter against the October chill and wonder how many people walking these same cobblestones have noticed these little calling cards, these breadcrumbs leading to London's most innovative entrepreneurs. Because that's what they were, really. Entrepreneurs who happened to operate in the shadows, women who built empires from society's darkest corners, and quite deliberately revolutionized two entire industries in the process. Twice. They did it twice, these ladies whom polite society pretended didn't exist. Let's settle in together and explore how Victorian brothels, those establishments polite society pretended didn't exist, managed to invent modern marketing techniques and specialized service industries decades before anyone else even thought to try. Take a deep breath of that coal-tinged air. We're about to discover that innovation has always found a way, even in the most unexpected places. You're walking now, following those discreet breadcrumbs through the winding streets of Victorian London. The fog seems to muffle sound itself, wrapping the city in a blanket of whispered secrets and muffled footsteps. Gas lamps create pools of amber light that fade into darkness, and between them, in those shadowy spaces, entire worlds of commerce and creativity flourish beyond the reach of Victorian propriety. The establishments you're learning about weren't the crude, desperate places that sensational novels would have you believe. These were businesses, sophisticated, carefully managed operations run by women who understood something that wouldn't become common knowledge in legitimate commerce for another 50 years. That customers don't just want a service, they want to feel special, understood, catered to in ways that make them feel like they're the only person in the world who matters. And here's where our story takes its first surprising turn, because these ladies of the night figured out niche marketing before department stores, before advertising agencies, before anyone in the so-called respectable business world had even conceived of such a thing. Picture yourself in the drawing room of Mrs. Georgiana Hartwell's establishment on Curzon Street. The year is 1882, and you're not here as a customer, but as an observer, a fly on the wallpapered wall of one of London's most exclusive houses of ill repute. The room is decorated with surprisingly good taste, Persian rugs, oil paintings that wouldn't look out of place in a gentleman's club, and furniture that speaks of comfort rather than ostentation. Mrs. Hartwell herself moves through this space like a general surveying her domain. She's a woman in her 40s, dressed in deep burgundy silk that rustles softly as she walks. Her hair is pinned in the latest fashion, her manner brisk but not unkind. She's conducting what she calls her evening consultations, meetings with her girls to discuss their particular specialties, their unique offerings, their personal brands. Because that's what they were creating, decades before anyone used that term. Personal brands. Violet, Mrs. Hartwell says to a young woman in pale blue, "You'll be handling the university gentlemen this evening. They prefer discussion of literature, remember. Keep Tennyson and Browning close at hand." She turns to another girl, this one with striking red hair. "Clara, the shipping magnate prefers continental sophistication. Brush up on your French pronunciation." You're witnessing the birth of specialized customer service, the careful cultivation of distinct market segments, the recognition that different clients want fundamentally different experiences. While legitimate businesses were still operating on the assumption that one size fits all, these establishments had discovered the power of making every customer feel like their needs were uniquely understood and catered to. Imagine for a moment that you're a young barrister named Thomas, making your first nervous visit to Mrs. Hartwell's establishment. You've been given the address by a colleague, along with a specific phrase to use: "I'm here for instruction in parliamentary procedure." The maid who answers the door, dressed more like a governess than a servant, nods knowingly and leads you to a sitting room where a woman in her 20s waits, a stack of legal texts artfully arranged on the side table. "Mr. Thomas," she says warmly, "I understand you're interested in the finer points of legislative debate. I've been studying the reform bills extensively." Her voice carries just the right hint of education, her dress suggests respectability, and the conversation that follows weaves seamlessly between political theory and more intimate subjects. You leave 3 hours later, convinced that you've discovered not just a service, but an experience crafted specifically for men of your profession, your interests, your particular desires for intellectual stimulation alongside physical comfort. You had no idea you just participated in the world's first focus-grouped customer experience. But that's only the first innovation. The second one is even more remarkable. You find yourself now in a small printing shop in Covent Garden, the air thick with the smell of ink and paper. It's 3 months later, and Mrs. Hartwell is meeting with a nervous-looking printer named Mr. Fitzwilliam. Between them on his desk lies something revolutionary, a small leather-bound catalogue, elegantly designed and discreetly worded. "Private instruction in continental arts," reads one entry. "Lessons in classical positioning," suggests another. "Specialized tutoring in ancient Greek customs." To the uninitiated, it might sound like an unusual educational institution. To those in the know, it's something else entirely. The world's first coded advertising catalogue. Mr. Fitzwilliam adjusts his spectacles and reads through the pages again, his brow furrowing slightly. He's been in the printing business for 20 years, has handled everything from religious tracts to railway timetables, but he's never seen anything quite like this. The language is so carefully crafted, so precisely ambiguous. Ancient Greek customs could mean classical studies, couldn't it? Continental arts might refer to painting techniques from France or Italy. And yet something in the way Mrs. Hartwell explains the distribution methods, the particular gentlemen's clubs where these catalogues will be placed, the knowing look in her eye when she discusses specialized clientele, makes it clear that he's printing something far more revolutionary than educational materials. Mrs. Hartwell is explaining to Mr. Fitzwilliam how these catalogues will be distributed, not on street corners or through crude handbills, but placed strategically in gentlemen's clubs, slipped into the right coat pockets, tucked between the pages of respectable newspapers left in railway carriages. Each catalogue contains detailed descriptions of services offered, complete with pricing structures and appointment procedures, all wrapped in language so carefully crafted that it could pass casual inspection by even the most morally rigid Victorian matron. You're watching the invention of euphemistic advertising, of coded marketing, of the entire concept of selling something socially unacceptable by making it sound like something else entirely. These women had created a sophisticated system of communication that allowed them to reach their target market while maintaining plausible deniability. They'd figured out how to advertise the inadvertisable. This second innovation would eventually transform everything from patent medicine sales to political campaigning, from luxury goods marketing to entertainment promotion. The careful art of saying one thing while meaning another, of creating desire while maintaining respectability, of building anticipation through suggestion rather than explicit declaration. All of this was being perfected in the unlikely workshops of Victorian brothels. The fog is lifting now as you walk back through those London streets, and you can see more clearly the scope of what you've discovered. These establishments, dismissed by polite society, ignored by business historians, written off as crude commerce, had actually pioneered two techniques that would become fundamental to modern capitalism: niche marketing and coded advertising. They'd done it not once, but twice, not by accident, but through careful observation of human nature, through understanding what their customers really wanted, and through the kind of innovative thinking that desperation and social marginalization can sometimes inspire. Mrs. Hartwell and women like her weren't just running businesses. They were running laboratories of human desire, places where the careful study of what people wanted, what they feared, and what they were willing to pay for was refined into an art form. They understood long before anyone else that selling something wasn't just about the product itself, but about the experience of buying it, the feeling it created, the story it told about the purchaser. As you settle back into the comfortable darkness, consider this. Sometimes the most significant innovations come not from the centers of power and respectability, but from the edges, from the places where necessity forces creativity, where social constraints inspire the most elegant solutions. The next time you see a perfectly targeted advertisement, the next time you encounter a business that seems to understand exactly what you want before you've even expressed it, remember Mrs. Hartwell and her contemporaries. Remember that they figured it out first, and they did it twice. But this is only the beginning of our story. There's so much more to discover about these remarkable women and their quiet revolution. For now, though, rest easy knowing that innovation has always found a way, even in the most unexpected places, even in the shadows of Victorian respectability. The fog is settling in again, and London's secrets are safe for another night. But you're not quite ready to sleep yet, are you? There's something about Mrs. Hartwell's story that keeps tugging at the edges of your consciousness, something that whispers, there's more to discover in those gaslit corridors of innovation. Let's follow that whisper, shall we? Because 3 streets over from Mrs. Hartwell's establishment, in a narrow townhouse on Half Moon Street, another kind of revolution is taking place. The brass nameplate beside the door reads simply, Miss Adelaide Whitmore, Private Tuition, and if you didn't know better, you might mistake it for the residence of a governess specializing in difficult children. You're climbing the steps now, your footsteps muffled by thick Persian runners, and you can hear the soft murmur of conversation drifting from behind mahogany doors. But listen more carefully. There's something unusual about the rhythm of these voices, something almost methodical about the way they rise and fall. You're about to witness something that won't appear in respectable business schools for another century, the world's first customer satisfaction survey. Miss Adelaide Whitmore stands in her private sitting room, a ledger open before her on a delicate writing desk. She's younger than Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps 35, with prematurely silver hair that she wears like a crown of experience. Her dress is deep forest green, practical yet elegant, and she holds her pen with the precision of someone who understands that details matter more than most people realize. "Now then, Charlotte," she says to a woman seated across from her, "tell me about Mr. Pemberton's visit last Tuesday. What did he seem to enjoy most? What made him, shall we say, less comfortable?" Charlotte shifts in her chair, the silk of her wrapper catching the firelight. "He appreciated the reading, Miss Adelaide, particularly the passages from Keats, but he seemed nervous about the Greek pottery reproductions, kept asking if they were authentic." She pauses, considering. "I think he would have preferred something more scholarly, perhaps some Roman architecture prints." Miss Adelaide makes careful notes, her pen scratching softly against the paper. "And his departure? Was he satisfied with the overall educational experience?" "Oh yes, miss. He lingered quite a while, discussing the Renaissance painters, asked specifically when he might return for more art appreciation." You're watching something remarkable unfold. These women aren't just providing a service, They're studying it, refining it, treating each encounter as a data point in an ongoing experiment in human satisfaction. Miss Adelaide has created what she calls her evening evaluations, systematic debriefings with her staff about each client's preferences, reactions, and unspoken desires. The fire pops gently in the grate as Miss Adelaide moves to the next entry in her ledger. Mrs. Thompson mentioned that Lord Ashworth seemed particularly drawn to the music room arrangements. Charlotte, what did you observe? He relaxed considerably once I began playing the pianoforte, miss. Chopin specifically. He mentioned that his late wife used to play the same piece. Charlotte's voice grows softer. I think he comes here less for the usual services and more for the feeling of refined company. Someone who understands beauty, you know. This is the breakthrough, right here in this quiet room with its careful conversations and methodical note-taking. These women have discovered that their true innovation isn't in the physical services they provide, but in their ability to understand, catalogue, and anticipate human emotional needs with scientific precision. Miss Adelaide closes the ledger and moves to a cabinet filled with what appear to be recipe books, but as you peer closer, you realize these aren't cooking instructions. They're something far more sophisticated. Each leather-bound volume is labeled with a different category: scholarly gentlemen, military officers, widowed merchants, continental travelers. Inside each book, page after page of careful observations about preferences, conversation topics, environmental details that create comfort, specific touches that enhance the overall experience. The essence of our success, Miss Adelaide explains to Charlotte as she pulls down the volume marked University Men, is that we've discovered something most businesses never realize. People don't simply purchase what they need, they purchase how they want to feel. She opens the book to a section headed Classical References and runs her finger down a list of topics that includes everything from ancient philosophy to modern poetry, from wine preferences to preferred lighting arrangements. Mr. Pemberton doesn't come here primarily for companionship. He comes here to feel like the sophisticated gentleman he believes himself to be. Our job is to create an environment where that vision of himself can flourish. The clock on the mantelpiece chimes 11, its soft notes floating through the warm air like drops of honey. Through the window, you can see the gas lamps creating their familiar pools of amber light in the street below, and you realize that while the rest of London sees only shadows and fog, you're looking into the bright heart of something unprecedented. Because what Miss Adelaide has created isn't just superior customer service, it's the birth of psychological marketing, the recognition that successful commerce depends not on meeting practical needs, but on fulfilling emotional fantasies that customers might not even be able to articulate themselves. The conversation continues in that gentle, methodical way, and you find yourself drawn deeper into the sophistication of their operation. Charlotte mentions that she's been experimenting with different tea services: Earl Grey for the bankers, jasmine for the poets, simple English breakfast for the military men who seem suspicious of anything too exotic. Miss Adelaide notes this carefully, asking follow-up questions about timing, presentation, the specific china patterns that seem to create the most comfort. What about the new gentleman, the one who arrived Wednesday? Miss Adelaide asks. Mr. Hartley, I believe. How did the initial consultation proceed? Charlotte smiles, her expression of professional satisfaction crossing her features. Beautifully, miss. I used the standard approach, asked about his interests while serving sherry in the blue sitting room. He mentioned that he'd recently returned from India, seemed rather melancholy about it. Started speaking about the loneliness of colonial service, the difficulty of maintaining English sensibilities in such a foreign place. And your response? I mentioned that my fictitious brother had served in Calcutta, praised the courage required for such service. Then I shifted the conversation toward English gardens, how comforting familiar flowers can be after long absence. By the time we moved to more intimate matters, he was completely at ease. Kept calling me his dear English rose. Miss Adelaide makes several notes, then looks up thoughtfully. Schedule him for next week, but make sure the room is prepared with jasmine tea. It will remind him of India without the associated melancholy, and perhaps some sketches of English countryside. We want him to feel simultaneously worldly and safely home. You're witnessing the birth of what will eventually be called customer psychology, market research, and brand management, all wrapped in the discreet efficiency of women who've learned to read human nature like a particularly complex book. These ladies have discovered that their true product isn't physical pleasure, it's emotional satisfaction, carefully crafted and precisely delivered. The fire settles lower in the grate, casting longer shadows across the room, and Miss Adelaide closes her ledgers for the evening. But before she dismisses Charlotte, she opens one more book, this one bound in deep blue leather and marked simply Innovations. "I've been thinking," she says, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a particularly interesting secret, "about expanding our subscription service." Your attention sharpens, because what's coming next will sound remarkably familiar to anyone who's ever received a monthly delivery of carefully curated goods designed specifically for their tastes and preferences. Rather than waiting for gentlemen to visit us, Miss Adelaide continues, what if we brought certain educational services to them? Small packages, discreetly delivered, containing items suited to their particular interests. Books, perhaps, or artistic prints, small tokens that remind them of their time here while encouraging return visits. Charlotte leans forward, clearly intrigued. "You mean like a lending library, but more personal?" "Precisely, but more than that, a service that demonstrates our continued attention to their individual preferences. Mr. Pemberton might receive a slim volume of romantic poetry with a pressed flower tucked between the pages. Lord Ashworth might find sheet music for a Chopin piece delivered with his morning post. Nothing overtly commercial, nothing that couldn't be explained as a gift from a cultured friend." Miss Adelaide moves to her desk and pulls out a sheet of paper covered with her neat handwriting. "I've been corresponding with a printer in Edinburgh who specializes in limited editions. He can create beautiful little volumes that appear to be legitimate publications while carrying our subtle identification marks. And I've found a flower seller in Covent Garden who can press botanical specimens to order." You're watching the birth of subscription marketing, of customer retention through personalized service, of the entire concept of creating ongoing relationships with clients rather than simply conducting individual transactions. These women are inventing the idea that the most successful businesses don't just serve customers, they cultivate them, nurture them, create emotional bonds that transcend simple commercial exchange. The clock chimes 11:30 and Charlotte rises to leave, but not before Miss Adelaide hands her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For your own study," she says with a gentle smile. "A book on conversational French. I've noticed several of our newer clients mentioning continental travel." As Charlotte's footsteps fade down the hallway, Miss Adelaide returns to her desk and opens a correspondence folder. Inside are letters from women in Edinburgh, Manchester and Bath, other establishment owners who've heard whispers of her innovations and want to learn more. She's been quietly building what future generations will recognize as a professional network, sharing techniques and strategies that are elevating their entire industry. But that's a story for another evening, when the fog rolls in a little thicker and London's secrets feel ready to reveal themselves once more. For tonight, let the soft sounds of Miss Adelaide organizing her papers lull you towards sleep. Let the image of her careful innovations, her methodical kindness, her quiet revolution in understanding human nature settle into your dreams like warm milk and honey. The gas lamps are dimming now, and the fog is wrapping the city in its familiar embrace. Tomorrow will bring new discoveries, new glimpses into the remarkable women who changed everything while the respectable world slept, unaware that the future of commerce was being written in the shadows of Victorian propriety. The fog has thickened now, wrapping around the gas lamps like silk scarves around elegant throats, and your footsteps echo softly against the cobblestones as you drift deeper into London's labyrinth of innovation. Miss Adelaide's methodical genius still lingers in your thoughts, but something draws you onward. Perhaps the faint sound of a music box playing somewhere in the distance, or the gentle glow emanating from a particularly grand townhouse at the corner of Bruton Street. The building before you is different from the others you visited tonight. Where Mrs. Hartwell's establishment spoke of practical efficiency and Miss Adelaide's whispered of scholarly refinement, this place seems to breathe with an almost magical attention to the senses themselves. The brass nameplate reads, Lady Cordelia Ashworth, Consulting Arrangements. And even in the dim gaslight, you can see that the front door has been painted a deep midnight blue, with silver stars scattered across its surface like a piece of captured sky. You're about to discover something that won't be properly understood by architects and designers for decades to come. The revolutionary idea that physical spaces can be deliberately crafted to influence human emotion and behavior. As you climb the steps and notice how each one has been carefully calculated to create the perfect rhythm, neither too steep nor too shallow, the front door opens as if by magic, but it's not magic at all, you realize, merely the result of Lady Cordelia's latest innovation, a system of carefully placed bells and pulleys that allows her staff to detect approaching visitors and open doors at precisely the right moment to create an impression of effortless hospitality. "Good evening," says a woman with warm amber eyes and auburn hair arranged in an elaborate but somehow entirely natural-looking style. This is Lady Cordelia herself, though she's not actually a lady in the titled sense. Rather, she's earned the designation through the sheer elegance of her approach to what she calls environmental psychology. You step into the foyer and immediately understand that something extraordinary is happening here. The air carries the faintest suggestion of lavender and vanilla, but also something else, something that makes you feel simultaneously more alert and more relaxed, though you can't quite identify what it is. The lighting comes not from harsh gas fixtures, but from carefully positioned mirrors that catch and multiply the gentle flame of strategically placed candles, creating a warm, golden atmosphere that seems to make everyone's complexion appear more flattering. The scent, Lady Cordelia explains to a gentleman who's just descended the staircase, looking remarkably refreshed and content, is a combination of bergamot, sandalwood, and just a whisper of jasmine. But the secret ingredient is orange blossom. It reduces anxiety while enhancing feelings of warmth and trust. I learned about it from a perfumer in Grasse who was experimenting with emotional responses to different botanical combinations. The gentleman nods appreciatively, though he clearly has no idea he's receiving a lesson in what will eventually be called aromatherapy and environmental design. As he departs, through that mysteriously well-timed front door, Lady Cordelia turns her attention to you, though of course she can't actually see you. Instead, she moves toward a small alcove where a young woman with intelligent dark eyes is waiting with what appears to be an architect's drawing board. "Now then, Beatrice," Lady Cordelia says, settling into a chair that's been positioned to catch the most flattering light. "Tell me about your observations from this evening's consultations." Beatrice, who you realize is not one of the establishment's working ladies but rather something like a research assistant, opens a leather portfolio filled with detailed sketches and notes. The gentleman in the blue room seemed most comfortable when seated near the window, but he kept glancing toward the corner where we'd placed the small Persian carpet. I think the pattern might have been too busy for his temperament. "Interesting," Lady Cordelia murmurs, making a note. "And Mr. Fletcher in the rose room?" He responded beautifully to the new arrangement. The way we angled the settee toward the fireplace created exactly the kind of intimate but non-threatening environment he seems to prefer. And the addition of those botanical prints, particularly the one with the English countryside scene, had him talking about his boyhood in Hampshire within minutes. You're witnessing something unprecedented, the systematic study of how physical environments affect human psychology and behavior. And here, in this scented sanctuary, lies the second innovation they accomplished before anyone else, twice over. First, these remarkable women transformed how desire itself was understood and framed. Now, they're revolutionizing the very spaces where human connection unfolds. decades before psychology becomes a formal science, generations before anyone coins the term user experience design. There is Lady Cordelia, quietly orchestrating emotional responses through velvet and candlelight. Lady Cordelia has discovered that by carefully controlling elements like lighting, scent, color, texture, and spatial arrangement, she can create rooms that don't just house interactions, but actively enhance them. The two women move to a large table covered with what look like architectural drawings, but as you lean closer, you realize these aren't plans for buildings, they're detailed maps of human comfort. Each drawing shows a different room layout, with careful notations about lighting angles, furniture positioning, color schemes, and what Lady Cordelia calls emotional flow patterns. "I've been thinking about the new gentleman, Mr. Whitmore," Lady Cordelia says, pointing to a sketch of a room arrangement. "Charlotte mentioned that he's recently returned from military service and seems rather, shall we say, easily startled by sudden sounds or movements." Beatrice nods, consulting her notes. "From what I observed, he's most at ease when he can see all the entrances to a room and when there's soft background sound to mask any unexpected noises. Perhaps the green room, but with the addition of that small fountain we've been experimenting with." Precisely what I was thinking. The gentle sound of water will provide auditory comfort, and if we position the seating area near the east wall, he'll have clear sight lines while still feeling enclosed and safe. Lady Cordelia makes several quick sketches, and I think warm earth tones rather than the usual jewel colors, something that feels more like a comfortable study than an elegant parlor. The clock on the mantelpiece chimes midnight with a particularly melodious tone, and you realize that even this detail has been carefully chosen. Nothing in Lady Cordelia's establishment is accidental. Every element has been selected and positioned to create specific psychological effects. Moving to another drawing table, Lady Cordelia shows Beatrice her latest innovation, a series of room designs that can be quickly modified based on the specific needs of different clients. "I call them adaptable environments," she explains, her voice carrying the quiet excitement of someone who's discovered something genuinely revolutionary. "Rather than having static rooms that must suit everyone reasonably well, we create spaces that can be subtly altered to suit someone perfectly." The drawings show ingenious details. Wall panels that can be rotated to display different artworks, lighting fixtures that can be adjusted not just for brightness, but for color temperature, furniture that can be quickly rearranged, and even small alcoves with different scent dispensers that can be activated depending on the client's preferences. For instance, Lady Cordelia continues, pulling out a detailed sketch. "Mr. Pemberton, whom I believe Miss Adelaide mentioned in her correspondence, prefers scholarly environments with classical references. But within that general category, we've discovered he's most comfortable with Roman rather than Greek influences, prefers warm golden lighting to cooler tones, and responds well to the scent of old books and leather." She shows Beatrice an ingenious system, bookcases on rotating panels that can display either Roman or Greek texts, gas fixtures with colored glass shades that can be quickly exchanged, small sachets of different scents that can be placed strategically around the room, and, perhaps most cleverly, heavy silk curtains in deep burgundy that can be drawn to create intimate alcoves or open to reveal tall windows overlooking a private garden. We can transform the scholar's study into his ideal environment in less than 10 minutes, and the gentleman will believe he's simply discovered the most perfectly appointed room in all of London. Beatrice makes careful notes, then looks up with curiosity. "And what about the ladies themselves? How do we help them adapt to these different environments?" This question leads to Lady Cordelia's most sophisticated innovation yet. She moves to a cabinet filled with what appear to be costume sketches, but you quickly realize they're something much more thoughtful. Detailed studies of how different styles of dress, posture, and movement work best in different environmental settings. Each room creates its own emotional atmosphere, Lady Cordelia explains, and our ladies must be prepared to harmonize with that atmosphere rather than simply occupying it. In the scholar's study, Charlotte learns to move more deliberately, to speak more thoughtfully, to position herself in ways that suggest intellectual companionship rather than mere physical attraction. She shows Beatrice a series of sketches illustrating different approaches: how to arrange oneself gracefully near a fireplace to create intimacy without crowding, how to use indirect lighting to enhance natural beauty, how to position books and teacups and other props to create the impression of shared interests and comfortable domesticity. But here's the truly revolutionary part, Lady Cordelia says, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial whisper of someone sharing a particularly delicious secret. We've discovered that when the environment is perfectly suited to a gentleman's psychological needs, he begins to see our ladies not as service providers, but as ideal companions, exactly the sort of women he's always imagined himself with. The implications of this insight ripple through your consciousness like stones dropped in still water. These women have discovered that by controlling the environmental context, they can influence not just comfort and satisfaction, but actual perception and emotional connection. As if to demonstrate this principle, Lady Cordelia lights a special lamp that fills the room with warm, golden light that makes everyone's skin appear luminous and healthy. The scent in the air shifts subtly, still pleasant, but now carrying hints of rose and cedar that create an atmosphere of elegant romance rather than business transaction. The gentleman believes he's simply enjoying the company of a fascinating, beautiful woman in a lovely room, Lady Cordelia explains. He has no idea that every element of his experience has been carefully orchestrated to make him feel like the most interesting, attractive, and desirable version of himself. Through the window you can see the fog swirling more slowly now around the street lamps, each lamp creating its own small universe of amber light in the gathering mist. The familiar world has become dreamlike and mysterious, and inside this warm, thoughtfully crafted space, you're witnessing the birth of environmental psychology, interior design as emotional artistry, and the profound understanding that human beings can be influenced as much by their surroundings as by the people they meet within them. The clock chimes midnight, its gentle notes floating through the scented air like a whispered lullaby, and Lady Cordelia begins organizing her drawings with the unhurried care of someone who understands that true innovation cannot be rushed. Tomorrow she'll implement new arrangements, test different combinations of light and scent and sound, continue her quiet revolution in understanding how physical spaces can be crafted to enhance human happiness. But for now, as the candles burn lower and cast longer, softer shadows across the room, let the gentle rustle of papers and the distant sound of settling coals in the fireplace ease you towards sleep. Let the image of these remarkable women, Mrs. Hartwell with her careful screening, Miss Adelaide with her methodical surveys, and Lady Cordelia with her environmental artistry, settle into your dreams like warm honey dissolving in milk, sweet and golden and perfectly dissolved into something larger than itself. The fog is wrapping London in its familiar embrace, thick and protective and infinitely gentle, and in the distance, a church bell tolls the late hour with drowsy, measured strokes that seem to grow softer with each chime. Tomorrow will bring new discoveries, new glimpses into the brilliant innovations being born in the gaslit shadows of Victorian propriety, new stories of women who changed everything while the world slept. But tonight, simply drift on the current of their collective genius, these women who understood human nature so deeply that they could orchestrate desire itself, who built the future quietly, elegantly, one carefully considered detail at a time, in the soft glow of their thoughtfully orchestrated sanctuaries. The fog has grown thicker still, transforming the gaslit streets into a watercolor painting where edges blur and boundaries dissolve. Your footsteps seem muffled now, as if the very air has become soft velvet, and the amber glow from Lady Cordelia's windows fades behind you like a memory of warmth. But something draws you forward through the mist, not a light this time, but a sound, or rather sounds, plural, drifting through the fog like musical notes scattered by an invisible hand. At first, you think you're hearing the distant murmur of a very refined soiree, gentle laughter, the soft clink of teacups, conversations that rise and fall like waves against a peaceful shore. But as you follow the sounds through the labyrinthine streets, you begin to notice something peculiar. The voices seem to be shifting. One moment you hear the crisp, precise diction of Cambridge education, the next, the warm rolling cadences of rural Yorkshire. A laugh that begins with aristocratic restraint transforms mid-note into something earthier, more genuine. The building you discover at the end of Albemarle Street is perhaps the most modest of all the establishments you visited tonight. A narrow townhouse squeezed between a bookbinder's shop and a milliner's, its facade painted in understated dove grey. The brass nameplate reads simply, Madame Vivienne, Conversational Arts, and even the door knocker has been wrapped in soft felt to prevent any jarring sounds that might disturb the carefully orchestrated atmosphere within. You're about to witness the third innovation these remarkable women achieved before anyone else understood its power: the systematic transformation of voice, manner, and persona as tools of psychological influence. The door opens, not with Lady Cordelia's mechanically perfect timing, but at precisely the moment when your curiosity reaches its peak, as if someone inside has been reading the rhythm of your interest. A woman appears who seems to embody every accent you heard drifting through the fog. She's neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain, but something far more intriguing, completely chameleon-like adaptable. "Good evening," she says, and her voice carries just the faintest trace of everywhere. Scottish Highlands in the rolled R, Irish coast in the musical lilt, London's finest drawing rooms in the careful vowels. This is Madame Vivienne herself, though you suspect that, like Lady Cordelia's title, the name Vivian is more of a professional designation than a birth certificate fact. You slip inside behind a gentleman who's just arriving, a nervous-looking fellow with the ink-stained fingers of a clerk and the hungry eyes of someone starved for genuine conversation. You watch as Madame Vivienne studies him for perhaps 3 seconds, and in that brief moment, something extraordinary happens. Her entire being shifts, like an actor stepping into character, except this transformation is far more subtle and infinitely more skillful. Her posture softens slightly, her voice drops half a tone to match his natural speaking range, and when she says, "How lovely to see you again, Mr. Thornfield," the words carry the exact cadence of educated middle-class comfort, not so refined as to intimidate, not so casual as to disappoint, but perfectly, precisely calibrated to make him feel like he's talking to exactly the sort of woman who might understand his particular view of the world. The foyer you enter is unlike anything you've seen in the previous establishments, where Mrs. Hartwell spoke of practical efficiency and Lady Cordelia's whispered of environmental psychology. This space seems designed around sound itself. The walls are hung with heavy tapestries that absorb echoes. The floors are covered in thick Persian rugs that muffle footsteps, and even the furniture seems chosen for its acoustic properties rather than its visual appeal. But the most remarkable feature becomes apparent only when you notice a young woman with copper hair and remarkably keen ears seated at a small writing desk in an alcove near the stairs. She's not taking dictation or managing appointments. She's listening, and more than that, she's transcribing what she hears. Not the words themselves, but something far more sophisticated. Madame Vivienne, the young woman, who you soon realize is called Penelope, says quietly as the nervous gentleman is escorted upstairs. Mr. Thornfield's breathing pattern suggests he's been walking quickly. His speech rhythms indicate fatigue, but also excitement. I'd recommend Clara adopts the Lower Yorkshire variant tonight. It will remind him of his childhood nurse, but with enough London refinement to suggest intellectual companionship. You're witnessing something that won't be formally studied for decades: the systematic analysis of vocal patterns, speech rhythms, and conversational psychology as tools for creating emotional connection. Madame Vivienne nods approvingly and makes a note in a leather-bound journal. And his conversational preferences? Still gravitating toward literary topics, but tonight he seems more interested in poetry than prose. His voice brightened considerably when he mentioned Tennyson during last week's session. I'd suggest Clara begin with something from In Memoriam. It will allow her to match his emotional register while drawing him into deeper conversation. As if summoned by their discussion, a young woman descends the staircase, presumably Clara, but you nearly don't recognize her as the same person who went upstairs 20 minutes ago. Her entire manner has transformed. Where she'd climbed those steps with the confident stride of a London working woman, she now moves with the gentler pace of someone raised in the countryside. Her voice, when she speaks to Madame Vivienne, carries exactly those lower Yorkshire cadences Penelope recommended, but softened with just enough urban sophistication to suggest someone who'd received an education beyond her rural origins. He's asking about his manuscript again, Clara reports, and even her choice of words reflects the careful character she's created. Poor dear's convinced no publisher will take it seriously. I've been encouraging him to read me passages. He has a lovely voice when he's not second-guessing himself. Madame Vivienne smiles with genuine warmth. Perfect instinct. Let him discover his own confidence through your appreciation. And remember, tonight he needs to feel like a poet, not a clerk who writes poetry in his spare time. Clara nods and glides back upstairs, but as she climbs, you notice something remarkable. Her transformation isn't complete yet. With each step, her posture becomes slightly more literary, her movement more gracefully contemplative, until by the time she reaches the landing, she's become exactly the sort of woman who would naturally appreciate unpublished poetry and see genuine talent where others might see merely hopeful scribbling. The voice, Madame Vivienne explains to Penelope as they settle at a table covered with what appear to be vocal coaching materials, is perhaps the most direct pathway to emotional memory. Change how someone sounds, and you change how they feel about themselves. But change how you sound to them, and you change how they feel about you. The materials spread across the table reveal the full scope of this innovation. Detailed charts showing the emotional associations of different regional accents, exercises for modifying vocal tone and cadence, extensive notes on how speaking patterns reflect social class, education, and emotional state. There are even small sketches showing optimal posture for different vocal approaches, how to hold your shoulders to project Yorkshire warmth, how to angle your head to suggest aristocratic attention, how to position your hands to encourage intimate conversation. But perhaps most remarkably, there's a thick journal filled with what Penelope calls conversational profiles, detailed analyses of how different gentlemen prefer to be spoken to, what topics animate them, what vocal patterns make them feel most understood and appreciated. Mr. Pemberton, Madame Vivienne reads from the journal, responds best to intellectual discourse conducted in the manner of Oxford tutorials, questions that draw out his knowledge rather than direct statements that might challenge his expertise. Miss Adelaide's reports indicate he's most comfortable when he feels like the teacher, so our ladies learn to ask precisely the right questions to help him discover how brilliant he actually is. Penelope consults another section of notes, and he has a particular fondness for classical references delivered with just enough uncertainty to allow him to elaborate. If Ophelia mentions Cicero, but seems slightly unclear about the historical context, Mr. Pemberton will spend 20 minutes providing fascinating details and leave feeling like the most interesting man in London. You realize you're witnessing the birth of what might be called conversational architecture, the deliberate crafting of dialogue patterns to create specific emotional experiences. These women have discovered that by carefully modulating not just what they say, but how they say it, they can help their clients become idealized versions of themselves. The clock in the hallway chimes 1 o'clock with a particularly soft, melodious tone. Even this timepiece has been chosen for its gentle voice, and Madame Vivienne begins organizing her materials with the unhurried precision of someone orchestrating a symphony of human connection. Tomorrow, she tells Penelope, we'll work on the Scottish variations. Lord McAllister is visiting next week, and I suspect he's homesick for the Highlands, but too proud to admit it. If Violet can master the subtle differences between Edinburgh educated and Glasgow working class, we can give him exactly the right combination of familiarity and refinement. Through the thick curtained windows, you can see the fog settling lower, transforming the gas lamps into soft, dreamy halos that seem to float independently in the mist. Inside this sanctuary of carefully modulated voices, you've discovered perhaps the most intimate innovation yet. The understanding that human beings crave not just physical comfort or intellectual compatibility, but the profound emotional satisfaction of being truly heard, understood, and appreciated exactly as they are. The house settles around you with gentle creaks and whispers, the sound of old wood relaxing into the quiet hours. And somewhere upstairs, you can hear the soft murmur of Mr. Thornfield reading his poetry aloud to someone who has become, through careful vocal alchemy, exactly the audience he's always dreamed of having. Let the fog thicken further outside these windows, wrapping London in its protective embrace of mist and softness. Let the gas flames flicker lower, casting longer shadows that dance gently across the tapestried walls. These remarkable women, Mrs. Hartwell with her psychological insights, Miss Adelaide with her scholarly methods, Lady Cordelia with her environmental artistry, and now Madame Vivienne with her vocal transformations, have each discovered a different facet of the same revolutionary truth, that human happiness can be crafted, orchestrated, and refined like the most delicate perfume or the most beautiful music. Tomorrow will bring new innovations, new glimpses into the quiet genius of women who understood the human heart so completely they could tune it like a musical instrument. But tonight, let yourself drift on the current of their collective wisdom, soft and warm and infinitely gentle, as the fog embraces the city and the distant church bells mark the passing hours with drowsy, measured strokes that grow softer and more distant with each peaceful chime. The fog has become your companion now, this gentle London mist that seems to part before you like silk curtains drawn by invisible hands. As you drift away from Madame Vivienne's sanctuary of voices, the cobblestones beneath your feet grow quieter still, as if the very stones have learned to whisper. The amber glow of gas lamps creates pools of warmth in the grey velvet darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls 2 o'clock with the soft resonance of bronze kissed by moisture. It's the scent that finds you first this time. Not the sound of voices or the glow of windows, but something far more subtle and infinitely more intoxicating. Jasmine and bergamot dance together on the night air, followed by the deeper notes of sandalwood and something you can't quite identify. Roses, perhaps, but roses with secrets, roses that have been taught to speak in whispers rather than bold proclamations. The fragrance grows stronger as you follow it through the maze of narrow streets, past shuttered shops and sleeping houses, until it leads you to what might be the most enchanting establishment yet. A corner building where Grosvenor Mews meets Audley Street, its facade painted in midnight blue with silver trim that catches the gaslight like captured starlight. The brass nameplate, polished to mirror brightness, reads, Madame Evangeline, Curator of Atmospheres. And even before you approach the door, you understand that you're about to discover their fourth innovation, perhaps the most sophisticated yet. Above the doorway, carved into the stone lintel with exquisite delicacy, is a garland of flowers, lily of the valley intertwined with forget-me-nots, their petals rendered so realistically in marble that you almost expect them to release their perfume into the night air. But these aren't merely decorative flourishes. As you'll soon discover, they're the first indication of a communication system so elegant, so refined, that it makes spoken language seem clumsy by comparison. The door opens before you can lift the silver knocker, not with Lady Cordelia's precise timing or Madame Vivienne's intuitive rhythm, but with the gentle inevitability of a flower opening to morning sunlight. The woman who greets you embodies grace itself, tall and willowy, with silver-touched auburn hair arranged in the Gibson girl style, and eyes the colour of lavender fields at twilight. This is Madame Evangeline, though like her predecessors, the name seems less important than the artistry she represents. Welcome, she says, her voice carrying the faint musical accent of someone who might have spent formative years in the gardens of Provence, to our little conservatory of understanding. As you step across the threshold, your senses are immediately overwhelmed, not harshly, but with the gentle insistence of walking into a master perfumer's workshop. The foyer is a symphony of scents, each one carefully orchestrated to create an atmosphere of such profound comfort that you feel your shoulders relaxing before you've taken 3 steps inside. But this isn't simply about pleasant aromas. What you're witnessing is the systematic use of olfactory psychology decades before anyone understood that smell is the most direct pathway to emotional memory, that certain fragrances can unlock feelings buried deeper than conscious thought, that the right combination of scents can make a person feel simultaneously comforted and desired, understood and mysterious. The gentleman ahead of you, a distinguished fellow with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed, pauses just inside the doorway, and you watch something remarkable happen. His entire demeanor shifts as the carefully blended atmosphere envelops him. His rigid military posture softens slightly, his stern expression gentles, and when Madame Evangeline offers to take his coat, he smiles with a warmth that transforms his entire face. "Colonel Weatherby," she says warmly, "how delightful to see you again. I believe Rosalind is expecting you in the lavender room this evening." But as she speaks, you notice her hand moving almost imperceptibly to a small silver bell pulled beside the door, not to ring it, but to adjust something. A moment later, the scent in the foyer shifts subtly. The jasmine becomes more prominent, joined by the warm, comfortable fragrance of cedar, and just a whisper of something that reminds you inexplicably of a library filled with leather-bound books and afternoon sunlight. You're witnessing their 4th innovation, a completely integrated system of scent-based communication and emotional influence that operates so smoothly it's nearly invisible. Following at a discreet distance, you discover that the house's interior is unlike anything you've experienced before. Each room exists within its own carefully crafted olfactory environment, and the transitions between them are managed with such artistry that you barely notice when one atmospheric composition gives way to another. The main sitting room envelops you in the gentle embrace of tea roses and vanilla, with subtle undertones of bergamot that seem designed to encourage both relaxation and stimulating conversation. But as you drift toward the music room, the scents gradually shift. The roses fade to a memory, replaced by the bright, intellectual fragrance of orange blossom and white tea, with just enough sandalwood to suggest sophistication without overwhelming the lighter notes. In an alcove near the staircase, you discover the nerve center of this olfactory orchestra, a remarkable woman with ink-stained fingers and the concentrated expression of a chemist working on a particularly delicate formula. This is Miss Cordelia, not to be confused with Lady Cordelia from earlier in your evening's journey, and she's surrounded by what appears to be the most sophisticated perfume laboratory you've ever seen. Glass bottles in every size and shape line the walls, each one labeled with not just its contents, but its emotional purpose. Confidence and warmth, nostalgic comfort, intellectual curiosity, gentle melancholy, passionate poetry. Small brass fixtures built into the walls allow scents to be distributed throughout the house through an elaborate system of hidden pipes and vents. Victorian central air conditioning, but for the emotions rather than temperature. "Madame Evangeline," Miss Cordelia says softly as the proprietress approaches. "Colonel Weatherby's breathing patterns suggest he's been agitated about something this week. I've adjusted the lavender room to include more of the sandalwood blend. It reminds him of his father's study according to his profile. And I've added just a whisper of the English garden after rain mixture. He mentioned missing his estate in the countryside during last month's visit. But the true genius of their system becomes apparent when you notice the fresh flowers arranged throughout the house. These aren't simply decorative, they're a code, a silent language that allows the ladies to communicate with both clients and each other without speaking a word. You watch as a young woman with remarkable poise descends the staircase, a single white camellia tucked behind her ear. Madame Evangeline glances at the flower and nods almost imperceptibly, then makes a subtle adjustment to the scent distribution in the foyer. The white camellia, you realize, means client requires gentle encouragement, and the atmospheric response is an increase in the warm, nurturing fragrances that will help the gentleman upstairs feel more confident and appreciated. Another lady appears briefly at the top of the stairs, touching a pink rose pinned to her bodice. This signal prompts Miss Cordelia to begin preparing a new scent blend, something you overhear her describing as sophisticated romance. Champagne and white orchids with deeper notes of amber and musk. The flower code extends throughout the house like a secret garden of meaning. Yellow roses signify intellectual conversation desired, while red roses indicate passionate encounter preferred. Forget-me-nots tucked into a sleeve mean client is melancholy, requires comfort, while orange blossoms worn as a corsage suggest celebration and joy appropriate. Lily of the Valley indicates discretion is particularly important, while purple violets signal that the gentleman is new and requires especially gentle introduction to the house's unique atmosphere. The sense of smell, Madame Evangeline explains to Miss Cordelia as they consult a leather-bound journal filled with scent formulations, bypasses rational thought entirely. A man might tell himself he's simply visiting for conversation, but the right fragrance can help him remember what it felt like to be truly cherished, to be seen as his best possible self. The journal reveals the full scope of their innovation. Detailed profiles of each regular client's scent preferences, emotional associations, and memories triggered by specific fragrances. Lord Pemberton responds favourably to anything reminiscent of his grandmother's rose garden, one entry notes. The combination of damask roses and lavender invariably relaxes his defensive postures and encourages authentic conversation. Another entry describes a gentleman who becomes most generous and appreciative when surrounded by scents that remind him of his honeymoon in Italy, lemon and rosemary with subtle notes of Mediterranean herbs. But perhaps most remarkably, the ladies themselves have learned to modify their own personal fragrances to complement their clients' preferences and emotional needs. You observe as a woman with golden hair consults Miss Cordelia about her evening's appointment. "Mr. Hartwell tonight," she says quietly. Miss Cordelia nods and selects a small crystal bottle from her collection. "The innocent wisdom blend for you this evening, Charlotte. Apple blossoms and clean linen, with just enough vanilla to suggest sweetness without sophistication. It will help him feel protective and important, while allowing you to guide the conversation toward the philosophical topics that truly interest him." Charlotte accepts the bottle with a graceful curtsy and applies the fragrance with practiced precision, not just to her pulse points, but in a careful pattern that will ensure the scent mingles perfectly with the room's atmospheric blend to create exactly the emotional environment Mr. Hartwell needs to feel like the wisest, most fascinating version of himself. The clock in the hallway chimes 2:30 with a melody that seems to float on the perfumed air like music made visible. And through the windows you can see the fog growing thicker still, wrapping the gas lamps in halos of amber light that pulse gently in the mist like heartbeats made of illumination. Somewhere in the distance, carried on the night air like a promise of further discoveries, you hear the faint sound of music, not the structured melodies of a parlor piano, but something more complex, more layered. String instruments weaving together in harmonies that seem designed to complement the house's olfactory symphony, creating an atmosphere where all the senses work together to craft an experience of such profound comfort and beauty that even the fog seems to pause outside the windows, reluctant to disturb such carefully orchestrated perfection. The scent of night-blooming jasmine drifts stronger now, calling you forward through the perfumed darkness toward whatever innovation awaits in the soft, musical shadows ahead. The music grows stronger as you follow its ethereal pull through the perfumed corridors, but this isn't the predictable waltz or drawing-room ballad you might expect. Instead, it's something far more sophisticated, layered melodies that seem to respond to the very atmosphere around them, shifting and evolving like a living conversation between instruments you can't quite identify. The fog outside has thickened to the consistency of pearl grey silk, muffling the distant sounds of London until the city itself seems to be holding its breath. Your footsteps echo softly on polished marble as you leave the scented sanctuary behind, drawn by harmonies that seem to beckon with fingers made of sound. The cobblestones beneath your feet change texture as you round a corner onto Albemarle Street, and suddenly you're standing before what might be the most extraordinary building yet. A Georgian townhouse whose windows glow not with the steady amber of gas lamps, but with light that seems to pulse gently in rhythm with the music drifting from within. The brass nameplate reads, Madame Serafina's Academy of Sensory Arts, and even the lettering seems to shimmer slightly, as if the very metal is alive with subtle vibration. Above the doorway, carved into the stone with breathtaking artistry, is a relief of hands in various gestures, not crude or obvious, but elegant studies in the language of touch, fingers trailing along a silk ribbon, palms pressed gently together in prayer or greeting, fingertips poised above piano keys as if about to release music into the world. The door opens before you approach, revealing a woman whose very presence seems to conduct the music around her. Madame Serafina moves with the fluid grace of someone who understands that every gesture creates its own rhythm, every step contributes to a larger symphony. Her dark hair is arranged in an elaborate chignon, adorned with small silver bells that chime softly as she turns her head, and her dress, deep burgundy velvet with intricate beadwork, catches the pulsing light like a constellation of tiny stars. "Welcome," she says, her voice carrying the trained resonance of someone who understands how sound can be sculpted and shaped, "to our little conservatory of sensation." As you cross the threshold, you immediately understand that you've discovered their fifth innovation, perhaps the most ingenious yet. This isn't simply a house where music plays. It's a carefully orchestrated environment where every sound, every texture, every tactile experience has been designed to work in harmony, creating a symphony of sensation that speaks directly to the deepest parts of human consciousness. The foyer surrounds you with music that seems to emanate not from any visible source, but from the very walls themselves. As you'll soon discover, hidden throughout the house is an elaborate system of resonating chambers and carefully positioned instruments that allow sound to be distributed and controlled with the same precision Madame Evangeline applied to her fragrances. A gentleman ahead of you, elderly, with the careful movements of someone who carries old wounds, pauses as he enters, and you watch his entire bearing transform. The music around him shifts subtly, the strings become warmer, more embracing, while a gentle woodwind melody emerges that seems designed specifically for his ears. His shoulders, which had been hunched with some private burden, gradually relax as the harmonies envelop him like an invisible embrace. "Lord Ashford," Madame Serafina greets him warmly. "How wonderful to see you again. I believe Adelaide is waiting for you in the harmony chamber this evening." But as she speaks, her fingers move to a small panel of ivory keys built into the wall beside the door, not to play a melody, but to adjust something. The music in the foyer shifts again. Strings and woodwinds are joined by the soft rhythmic whisper of what might be silk brushing against silk, creating an atmosphere of such profound comfort that you feel your own heartbeat beginning to synchronize with the gentle rhythms surrounding you. Following at a respectful distance, you discover that the house's interior exists within layers of carefully crafted sonic environments, each one designed to enhance different aspects of human connection and emotional intimacy. The main salon pulses gently with the deep, reassuring rhythm of a resting heartbeat, overlaid with the soft rustle of fabric and the occasional crystalline note that seems to celebrate the simple pleasure of breathing in harmony with another soul. But as you drift toward what appears to be a music room, the soundscape gradually transforms. The heartbeat rhythm fades to be replaced by something more playful, the musical equivalent of laughter, with bright piano notes dancing over the gentle percussion of fingertips on silk and the whispered melody of pages turning in a beloved book. Near the grand staircase, you discover the nerve center of this auditory orchestra, a remarkable woman with the focused intensity of a conductor mid-performance. This is Miss Harmony, a name that seems less coincidental than inevitable, and she's surrounded by what appears to be the most sophisticated sound control system imaginable. Before her is a console that resembles a pipe organ, but instead of traditional stops labelled with musical terms, each control bears descriptions of emotional states and tactile experiences: gentle reassurance, playful intimacy, melancholic comfort, passionate whispers, intellectual stimulation. By manipulating these controls, she can layer different sonic textures throughout the house, creating unique atmospheric compositions for each room and each encounter. Madame Serafina, Miss Harmony says softly as the proprietress approaches. Lord Ashford's pulse suggests he's been having difficulty sleeping again. I've adjusted the harmony chamber to include more of the low-frequency resonances. They'll help regulate his breathing and encourage the deeper relaxation he needs. And I've added the gentle rain texture. You know how it reminds him of happier times at his country estate. But the true genius of their system becomes apparent when you notice the ladies themselves participating in this symphony of sensation. Each woman wears clothing specifically chosen not just for its visual appeal, but for the sounds it creates. Silk that whispers secrets with every movement, taffeta that crinkles like autumn leaves, velvet that absorbs sound and creates pockets of intimate quiet, lace that rustles with the delicate music of complexity made beautiful. You observe as a young woman with extraordinary grace descends the staircase, her gown, pale blue silk with jet beading, creating a gentle percussion that harmonizes perfectly with the ambient music. Her fingers trail along the polished banister, and even this simple gesture adds to the sonic tapestry. The soft whisper of skin against smooth wood becomes part of the composition, a reminder that human touch can be its own form of music. Another lady appears at the top of the stairs, adjusting her amber velvet shawl. The fabric's distinctive rustle prompts Miss Harmony to begin layering a new textural element into the upstairs chambers, something she describes as autumn intimacy. The sound of leaves turning, of comfortable fires crackling, of wine being poured into crystal glasses that ring like distant bells. The tactile code extends throughout the house like an invisible language of sensation. Different fabrics signify different emotional needs: silk for gentle comfort, velvet for deeper intimacy, lace for playful sophistication, cotton for innocent sweetness, wool for protective warmth. The ladies communicate not just through their choice of clothing, but through how they interact with the textures around them. Fingers drumming a specific rhythm on a wooden table, palms pressed against silk wallpaper in a particular pattern, the deliberate rustle of fabric that signals specific requests to Miss Harmony's ever-attentive ears. Touch, Madame Serafina explains to Miss Harmony as they consult a leather-bound volume filled with sonic compositions, is the first language we learn and the last one we forget. The right combination of textures and sounds can help a person remember what it felt like to be truly held, to be touched with reverence rather than mere desire. The volume reveals the full scope of their innovation, detailed profiles of each client's sonic preferences, texture associations, and the specific combinations of sound and touch that help them feel most authentically themselves. Lord Pemberton responds beautifully to string quartets layered with the sound of pages turning, one-entry notes. The combination helps him feel intellectually appreciated, while the underlying textural elements remind him of being read to as a child. It encourages both vulnerability and confidence. Another entry describes a gentleman who becomes most receptive to genuine connection when surrounded by sounds that evoke his naval career. The gentle creaking of ship's timbers reproduced through carefully manipulated woodwinds, the distant sound of waves created by silk scarves being drawn across metal combs, all layered beneath melodies that speak of both adventure and the deep human need for safe harbor. The ladies themselves have learned to become instruments in this grand composition. You watch as a woman with copper-colored hair consults Miss Harmony about her evening's appointment. "Captain Morrison tonight," she says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow perfectly audible within the carefully tuned acoustic environment. Miss Harmony nods and begins adjusting her console. The brave tenderness composition for the maritime chamber, Isabella. I'll layer the ship sounds beneath Chopin's more adventurous nocturnes and add the texture of rope and canvas, but softened with silk and velvet overtones to remind him that true courage includes the willingness to be gentle. Isabella nods gracefully and moves toward a wall panel that opens to reveal an array of fabric samples. She selects several swatches: linen that whispers of sea breezes, silk that rustles like sails, velvet that suggests the comfort of a captain's quarters, and arranges them around her person with practiced artistry. Each fabric choice will contribute to the evening's sensory composition, helping Captain Morrison feel simultaneously adventurous and cherished, strong and allowed to be vulnerable. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes 3 o'clock with notes that seem to hang in the air like suspended dewdrops, each tone perfectly tuned to complement the house's ambient harmonies. Through the windows you can see the fog has become so thick that the gas lamps appear as floating orbs of light, pulsing gently in rhythm with the music that seems to emanate from the very heart of the building. Somewhere deeper in the house, carried on currents of sound that seem to flow like visible rivers of melody, you hear something new. Not just music and texture, but voices. Not singing exactly, but speaking in rhythms so perfectly calibrated that speech itself becomes another instrument in the grand composition. The words drift past like silk scarves on a gentle breeze, promising discoveries that exist at the very intersection of sound and meaning, of touch and understanding. The night air carries hints of what lies ahead, the soft percussion of footsteps on carpets woven to create their own musical textures, the whispered harmonies of conversations that blur the line between speaking and singing, the gentle symphony of human connection orchestrated with such artistry that even the fog outside seems to pause and listen, reluctant to disturb such carefully crafted perfection. Through the soft musical shadows ahead, something even more extraordinary awaits. As the gentle melodies from the symphony of touch begin to fade behind you, you find yourself drawn deeper into the house's mysteries. The carpet beneath your feet shifts from deep burgundy to a softer shade of twilight blue, scattered with tiny embroidered stars that seem to twinkle in the gaslight. You're following a narrow corridor now, one that feels different from the others, quieter somehow, more intimate, as if the very walls are holding their breath. The sounds here are different too. No longer the orchestrated harmonies of Miss Harmony's grand composition, but something more subtle, the gentle whisper of pages turning, the soft scratch of pen on paper, the occasional sniffle or quiet sigh that speaks of deeper emotions being tended to with infinite care. At the end of this hushed hallway, you discover a door painted the color of forget-me-nots, with a small brass nameplate that simply reads, "Remembrance." Your hand hesitates on the porcelain handle, sensing something profound waiting beyond. You step inside and immediately understand why this room feels sacred. The memory room, as you come to know it, represents Madame Serafina's sixth and perhaps most revolutionary innovation, the world's first intentional space for emotional aftercare and gentle remembrance. Long before psychology would have words for such concepts, these remarkable women understood that intimacy leaves echoes in the heart, and that sometimes the most healing gift you can offer someone is simply a place to sit with their feelings. The room itself is a masterpiece of gentle comfort. Soft armchairs upholstered in dove-grey velvet are arranged in cozy clusters, each positioned near tall windows draped with gossamer curtains that filter the gaslight into something resembling moonbeams. Between the chairs, small round tables hold delicate bone china tea services, leather-bound journals, and curious glass vessels filled with what appears to be coloured sand in intricate patterns. But it's the woman seated near the fireplace who captures your attention most completely. Lady Vivienne, for that's how she introduces herself, possesses an extraordinary gift that would make her legendary among the gentlemen callers, though few would ever speak of it publicly. She has what Madame Serafina calls the remembering touch, the ability to help people reconnect with their most cherished memories through the gentlest contact. Memory, she explains softly to a gentleman who sits nearby, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of lavender tea, lives not just in our minds, but in our bodies. Sometimes we need someone to help us find our way back to who we truly are. You watch as she places her fingertips, barely making contact, against the gentleman's temples. Her touch is so light it seems more like the whisper of butterfly wings than human contact. Yet you can see the immediate change in his expression. His shoulders, which had been carrying some invisible burden, begin to relax. A soft smile plays at the corners of his mouth, as if he's encountering an old friend he'd forgotten he'd lost. "My mother's garden," he whispers, wonder evident in his voice. "I can smell the roses. I can hear her humming while she tends the lavender. I haven't thought of that in, oh, it must be 20 years. Lady Vivian nods knowingly. The body remembers what the mind sometimes needs help accessing. Would you like to write about it? Sometimes capturing memories in words helps them stay with us when we return to the world outside. The innovation here isn't just Lady Vivian's remarkable intuitive abilities, though those are extraordinary enough. It's the entire concept of aftercare as an art form. While the world outside operates under the assumption that intimate encounters end when physical contact ceases, Madame Serafina's establishment recognizes that true connection often begins where others think it ends. In this room, gentlemen callers are invited to process their experiences, to reconnect with forgotten parts of themselves, to remember not just the evening's encounters, but pieces of their own souls they may have misplaced in the harsh machinery of Victorian society. Some write in the journals provided, their pens scratching softly across paper as they capture thoughts they've never dared voice aloud. Others simply sit quietly, allowing themselves to feel without judgment or expectation. Near the window, an older gentleman sits in contemplative silence, occasionally touching one of the coloured sand vessels. These, you learn, are memory glasses, another of Lady Vivian's innovations. Each contains sand in different hues and textures, and by running his fingers through the grains, visitors can explore different emotional textures. The rough amber sand that evokes autumn afternoons and childhood adventures. The smooth, pearl-white grains that bring to mind wedding days and first loves. The deep blue crystals that call forth memories of summer evenings and profound peace. Touch, Lady Vivian explains to another visitor, a young man who seems overwhelmed by some recent encounter, is the language the heart speaks when words aren't enough. Sometimes we need to feel our way back to ourselves. She guides him to a collection of fabric samples arranged on a low table. Silk pieces in every imaginable texture and weight. Velvet swatches in colours that range from midnight blue to sunrise gold. Lace fragments delicate as spider webs. Wool pieces as soft as cloud shadow. Each fabric, she explains, can evoke different emotional memories and help visitors reconnect with aspects of themselves they may have forgotten. The young man's fingers hover uncertainly over the fabrics before settling on a piece of cream-coloured silk, worn soft with age. As he touches it, his breathing deepens and his posture shifts. "My grandmother's handkerchief," he murmurs. "She always kept one tucked in her sleeve. It smelled like rose water and kindness." You notice that several of the ladies from the house drift in and out of this space throughout the evening, not as courtesans now, but as gentle companions in the art of remembering. They bring fresh tea, adjust the lighting, or simply sit quietly nearby, available if needed, but never intrusive. Their presence serves as a bridge between the intense intimacy of their professional encounters and the gentler process of integration and self-discovery. One lady, a young woman with auburn hair arranged in a simple chignon, sits cross-legged on a cushion beside an elderly gentleman who appears to be struggling with some deep emotion. She doesn't speak, doesn't offer advice or comfort, but simply exists as a stable, warm presence while he works through whatever memories Lady Vivian's touch has awakened. Occasionally she hands him a fresh handkerchief or refills his teacup, but mostly she just witnesses his process with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for sacred rituals. The gift we offer, Lady Vivian had explained earlier to a newer gentleman who seemed puzzled by the room's purpose, isn't just physical pleasure or even emotional connection. It's the chance to remember that you are more than your daily struggles, more than your professional obligations, more than the armor you wear to navigate the world. You are someone who once laughed at butterfly wings and cried at sunset and believed in magic. Sometimes we all need help remembering those parts of ourselves. The clock on the mantelpiece chimes softly. 4 o'clock now, deep in the heart of night when the boundaries between memory and dream become most permeable. Through the gauze curtains, you can see that the fog has become so thick it seems almost solid, as if the entire world has been wrapped in pearl grey silk. The gaslight from the street below creates halos of golden light that pulse gently, keeping time with the quiet rhythms of breath and remembrance filling the room. A new visitor enters, a middle-aged gentleman with the careful movements of someone carrying old grief. Lady Vivian rises to greet him with the same gracious attention she's offered everyone this evening, but you can see in her expression that she recognizes something particularly tender in his demeanor. "Welcome back, Mr. Hartwell," she says softly. "Would you like to visit the memory of your daughter's laughter tonight, or are you ready to explore something new?" His eyes fill with tears of gratitude, not sadness but profound appreciation for being seen so completely. "The laughter, please," he whispers. "It's been such a difficult week at the office. I'd forgotten how it sounded." As Lady Vivian guides him to a comfortable chair near the fireplace, you begin to understand the true scope of what these remarkable women have created. This isn't just revolutionary in terms of business innovation. It's a quiet rebellion against a society that teaches people to fragment themselves, to separate body from heart, from memory from soul. Here, in this room scented with lavender and possibility, integration is not just allowed but celebrated as the highest art. Through the soft, memory-scented shadows ahead, you sense that your journey through this extraordinary establishment is drawing towards something even more profound. Perhaps the discovery that will explain why this night has felt less like exploration and more like coming home to parts of yourself you'd forgotten existed. The grandfather clock in the corner of the memory room chimes 5 in the morning, its brass pendulum catching the last flickers of gaslight as dawn begins to paint the fog-wrapped windows with the faintest blush of pearl. You've been here for hours now, though time has moved differently in this house, flowing like honey, thick with meaning and sweet with possibility. As you prepare to leave the memory room, Lady Vivian approaches with that same gentle grace that has characterized every interaction this evening. But there's something different in her expression now, a knowing smile that suggests your journey isn't quite complete. "Before you go," she says softly, her voice carrying the warmth of shared secrets, "Madame Serafina would like a word. She's in her private study, just through that door behind the bookshelves. I think you'll find what she has to share illuminating." You follow her gesture to what you'd assumed was simply another wall lined with leather-bound volumes. But as Lady Vivian touches a particular spine, a copy of Wordsworth's poetry, naturally, the entire section swings inward with the whisper-quiet precision of a well-kept secret. Beyond lies a smaller, more intimate space that feels like stepping into the heart of a music box. The study is circular, with curved walls lined in midnight blue silk and scattered with star charts and botanical illustrations. Soft lamplight pools around a mahogany writing desk where a woman sits, her silver hair arranged in an elegant chignon, her fingers moving gracefully across the pages of what appears to be a leather-bound ledger. This is Madame Serafina herself, the architect of everything you've witnessed tonight. She looks up as you enter, and her eyes hold the kind of deep intelligence that comes from truly seeing people, from understanding the delicate machinery of the human heart with the precision of a master clockmaker. "Welcome," she says, her voice carrying the musical cadence of someone who has spent decades listening to the subtle harmonies of human need. "Please sit. I imagine you have questions about what you've experienced tonight." You settle into a chair upholstered in fabric that feels like clouds caught in moonlight, and she continues, her fingers still moving across the ledger's pages. Most visitors leave here changed, but few understand the larger pattern they've been part of. Would you like to know the true innovation we've created? She turns the ledger toward you, and you see page after page of carefully recorded observations. Not the crude accounting you might expect from such an establishment, but something that looks more like the research notes of a pioneering scientist. Each entry documents not transactions, but transformations, detailed records of how different forms of touch and presence affect the human spirit, careful observations about the connection between physical intimacy and emotional healing, methodical notes about the aftercare protocols that help people integrate profound experiences. What we've done here, Madame Serafina explains, her voice taking on the quality of someone sharing a cherished secret, is something that won't be formally recognized by the world of medicine and psychology for another 50 years. We've proven that true intimacy, the kind that heals rather than simply satisfies, requires what we call the complete embrace. Not just physical connection, but emotional preparation, spiritual presence, and most importantly, gentle integration afterward. She gestures to the walls around you, and you notice they're covered with correspondence, letters from physicians, botanists, even a few progressive clergymen, all seeking to understand the techniques being developed within these walls. We've been documenting everything, sharing our discoveries with those open enough to listen. Dr. Harrison from the Royal College has been particularly interested in our observations about the connection between touch and memory. Professor Adelaide Morrison from the Women's Medical Society visits monthly to discuss our findings about emotional aftercare. Your eyes widen as you begin to understand the scope of what you've witnessed. This isn't just a brothel that happened to develop innovative practices. This is a research establishment disguised as a house of pleasure, a place where the arts of healing and intimacy are being studied and refined with scientific precision, decades before such concepts will find their way into medical textbooks. But here's what makes this truly remarkable, Madame Serafina continues, turning another page in the ledger to reveal detailed architectural drawings and staff training protocols. 3 months ago, we opened our second location, a house in Edinburgh run by my former colleague, Miss Cordelia Beaumont, and 6 weeks after that, a third establishment in Bath, overseen by Lady Catherine Whitmore. She stands and moves to a wall map dotted with small silver pins. Each house operates on the same principles we've developed here: the complete embrace philosophy, the integration of therapeutic touch with emotional aftercare, the recognition that true intimacy requires tending the whole person, not just their immediate desires. You stare at the map, understanding finally dawning. This is the one thing done twice that will make this establishment legendary, not just the innovation of holistic intimacy care, but the revolutionary act of systematically replicating and sharing these discoveries. While other establishments guard their secrets jealously, Madame Serafina has been quietly building a network of healers disguised as courtesans, spreading techniques that won't be officially discovered by medical science for generations. We train each new house meticulously, she explains, returning to her desk and pulling out a thick manual bound in soft leather. 6 months of instruction in everything from Lady Vivian's memory work to Miss Harmony's orchestrated encounters, from the preparation rituals you experience with Rose to the integration practices of the memory room. Each woman who joins our network becomes part of something larger than herself, a quiet revolution in how we understand the connection between body, heart, and spirit. She opens the manual, and you glimpse pages filled with detailed illustrations of touch techniques, recipes for therapeutic preparations, guidelines for emotional aftercare, even musical notations for the kinds of compositions that best support different stages of intimate connection. The gentlemen who visit our houses have no idea they're participating in the development of therapeutic techniques that will one day help countless people heal from trauma, rediscover lost parts of themselves, and learn to integrate all aspects of their humanity. They simply know they leave feeling more whole than when they arrived. Outside the window, the fog is beginning to lift with the approaching dawn. revealing the cobblestone street below where gas lamps flicker like drowsy fireflies. The world is waking up, but slowly, gently, like someone emerging from the most restorative of dreams. Madame Serafina closes the ledger and looks at you with eyes that hold both wisdom and infinite kindness. What we've created here will influence the world in ways no one can yet imagine. The techniques developed in these rooms will one day help shell-shocked soldiers returning from wars not yet fought, comfort women struggling with griefs not yet named, guide couples toward intimacies not yet dreamed of. She stands and moves to a small cabinet, withdrawing what appears to be a simple glass vial filled with clear liquid. Lavender and rose essence, she explains, distilled using a process Lady Vivian developed for anchoring positive memories. A single drop on your pillow will help you remember not just this night, but the feeling of being completely seen and accepted. As she hands you the vial, her fingers brush yours briefly, and you feel a warmth that seems to travel straight to your heart. Not romantic or sexual, but something deeper. The recognition of one soul by another, the gentle acknowledgement of your complete humanity. The world outside will wake soon, she says softly, and you'll return to your daily life, your responsibilities, your ordinary concerns. But something has shifted in you tonight. You've experienced what it feels like to be welcomed in your entirety, to have every part of yourself, body, heart, memory, and spirit, tended with reverence. She moves to the window and draws back the curtain slightly, revealing the street where dawn is painting everything in shades of pearl and gold. And perhaps most importantly, you've witnessed the beginning of a quiet revolution, the proof that healing and pleasure, science and art, innovation and tradition can work together to create something entirely new. You join her at the window, and together you watch as the fog curls away from the gas lamps, like silk scarves unfurling in a gentle breeze. The city is stirring, milk carts rattling over cobblestones, early risers hurrying toward their daily labours, the great machinery of Victorian life beginning another cycle. But something fundamental has changed in how you see it all. The people moving through the streets below aren't just bodies going through mechanical motions. They're souls carrying stories, hearts holding memories, spirits seeking connection and understanding, and the gentle touch that reminds them they're more than the sum of their daily struggles. This is what we've truly discovered, Madame Serafina whispers, her voice barely audible above the soft sounds of the waking city. That every person, no matter how lost or broken or forgotten they feel, carries within them everything they need to remember their own wholeness. Sometimes they just need someone to hold space for that remembering, to offer the kind of presence that says, you are seen, you are valued, you are worthy of the most tender care. The clock chimes 6, and you know it's time to leave. But as you prepare to step back through the hidden door into the memory room, Madame Serafina places a gentle hand on your shoulder. The work we do here will ripple outward in ways we can't yet imagine, she says. Every person who leaves these rooms changed carries that change into the world. Every technique we develop here will eventually find its way into the hands of healers and helpers who don't even know where these innovations began. This is how evolution happens, not through grand pronouncements or official recognition, but through quiet revolutions that begin with a single radical idea that every human being deserves to be loved in their entirety. You slip the vial of essence into your pocket and step back through the hidden door. The memory room is quieter now, most of the evening's visitors having found their way home to beds warmed by newfound memories and hearts gentled by careful tending. Lady Vivian nods knowingly as you pass, as if she can see the transformation that's taken place in Madame Serafina's study, written in the very air around you. The house that seemed so mysterious when you first arrived now feels like an old friend saying goodbye. The corridors that once pulsed with exotic mystery now hum with familiar warmth. As you make your way back through the constellation room, past the symphony of touch chamber, through the botanical sanctuary with its drowsing plants, you carry with you not just memories of an extraordinary evening, but the seed of a new understanding about what it means to be fully human. At the front entrance, the doorman, the same gentleman who welcomed you with such gracious formality hours earlier, helps you into your coat with movements that feel like a benediction. "Until we meet again," he says simply. And somehow you know that whether or not you ever return to this physical place, you'll carry its essence with you always. You step out into the London morning, where fog still clings to the gas lamps like whispered secrets reluctant to fade. The cobblestones are slick with dew, reflecting the golden light in patterns that remind you of Lady Vivian's memory glasses, each reflection holding its own story, its own possibility for wonder. As you walk away from the house, you turn back once to look at its facade. From the outside it appears unchanged, just another elegant Georgian townhouse among many, its windows now dark, its secrets safely hidden behind curtains and propriety. But you know that inside, a quiet revolution continues, the daily miracle of helping people remember their own completeness, the gentle art of healing through presence, the radical act of loving human beings in their entirety. The vial in your pocket catches the morning light, its simple glass holding not just lavender and rose essence, but the distilled spirit of what you've experienced. Proof that innovation often wears the humblest disguises, that healing can happen in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the most profound discoveries are made not in universities or laboratories, but in the tender spaces where people are brave enough to let themselves be fully known. London awakens around you, the fog thinning to reveal a world that looks exactly the same as it did last evening but feels entirely transformed. And as you make your way home through streets gilded with dawn light, you carry with you the knowledge that somewhere in this vast city, and now in Edinburgh and Bath as well, remarkable women are quietly revolutionizing what it means to care for the human soul. One gentle touch, one remembered moment, one complete embrace at a time. The revolution whispers on, tender as a lullaby, certain as the sunrise, gentle as the fog that finally lifts to reveal a world more beautiful than you'd ever noticed before. Sleep well, dear traveller. Dream of lavender and kindness, of fog-wrapped mysteries, and gentle hands that remember how to heal. The morning will be here soon enough, but for now, let yourself rest in the warm knowledge that you've witnessed something extraordinary, not just the birth of therapeutic intimacy, but the quiet proof that the world is always more magical, more innovative, more tenderly revolutionary than it appears from the surface. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible above the sounds of the waking city, you can still hear the gentle chiming of that grandfather clock, marking time in a house where healing happens one heartbeat at a time, where memories are treasured like precious gems, and where the art of loving people completely continues its quiet work of transforming the world.